Hello, everybody. My name is Helen Blyer, and I currently serve as the director of the Center for Lifelong Learning at Columbia Theological Seminary. So many of you on the screen are familiar faces over these many years. Um, One of my other side hustles these days is serving as the president for the Association of Leaders in Lifelong Learning for Ministry. We are a resource group, peer network, and think tank for people who lead continuing education and lifelong learning programs. And since, as you'll see, for about 7 years, we've been a related learning organization of REA, and there's some good thinking behind the decision to do that. I was going to begin by bringing up a Mentimeter, which seems a little complicated to do given the fact that we've got 12 participants here. So in lieu of that, I would like all of you who are joining us for this session to drop your name and where you're coming from, where you're zooming in from, in the chat pod. I'm also going to invite you either to use the chat pod or to use the raise hand function if that's available to you on the bottom of your screen. If you've got questions or comments that you're going to be making along the way. I'm going to be doing all the things. I told Alex in the warm-up that I'm feeling a little bit like the musician that you see busking outside of a restaurant with simultaneously the tambourine, guitar, harmonica, and everything else. So if we can keep it streamlined and you guys can alert me if you've got a question by the raise hand function or the chat pod, that would be fantastic. So one of the reasons why I'm here talking with you guys today is I come both as a trained religious educator and as somebody whose professional life is dedicated to both helping people in ministry sustain and improve their work, and to help the people who help people in ministry sustain and improve their work. This also involves opportunities to discern and deepen senses of vocation. I myself have been a long-time member of both OPRI, one of the predecessor organizations of this group, and REA itself. I attended my first conference back in 1995. I think I was 10 years old at the time. And what drew me to the work of religious education was a deep curiosity in how people make meaning out of their lives and the role that education and good educational design can play in that. I now direct a lifelong learning program, as I told you, which is part of that overarching commitment to the work of making meaning across a lifetime in various contexts that give form and challenge both to our senses of vocation. So as I mentioned, I serve as president for the Association of Leaders in Lifelong Learning for Ministry, ALLLM for short. We support people like me and like some of you on this screen who direct these non-degree programs to support people in ministry. During our time together, I've got a fairly modest agenda. The first is I'm going to give you a little background into what our organization does as a way of setting the pretext for the research I'll be sharing. Secondly, I'll be sharing some of the first glimpses of the research we've been doing in ALLLM to map the landscape of lifelong learning for ministry in North America. And finally, we're going to share some thoughts about what it means to be an edge organization, or as we like to call it in ALLLM, an ecotone, especially in the middle of a time of deep unrest, polarization, and steep transition, both in theological education, faith communities, and the contexts in which both of those things do their work. So taking on a whistle-stop tour of the history of ALLLM. ALLLM began in the late 1960s in response to a cultural moment. Its predecessor organization was the Society for the Advancement of Continuing Education for Ministry, set up as a mandate by the National Council of Churches. Why the late 60s? Well, this is on the heels of the aggiornamento that happened not only in the Roman Catholic Church after Vatican II, but also the cascade of transition that happened primarily also in mainline Protestant churches. What do you have? You have a whole bunch of ministers who are perhaps schooled in an old way of doing ministry who are now navigating this massive cultural shift. This organization was developed as a way to recognize the crucial importance of continuing education and lifelong learning at such a time of cultural transition, and to support the people who would be leading these programs. In response, a plethora of organizations, hundreds of them, were developed to lead lifelong learning through ministry, and they happened in 4 venues. It was the advent, of course, of the Doctor of Ministry program, now no longer considered part of ALLLM because it is an accredited degree granting program that is in the Association of Theological Schools wheelhouse. Denominations and judicatories had their own continuing education programs for their clergy. Theological schools, of course, stepped in, and then there were independent retreat centers and other faith-based organizations that provided retreat and learning opportunities for folks. Fast forward to 2011, the name change from SOCM to ALLLM happened in response to some of the shifts that were observed in the industry. Over the course of these couple of decades, we saw the membership fluctuate from flush times at the very beginning with over 200 members down to nearly folding because of different influences on the existence of these programs. Right before 2011, of course, the most recent influence had been the recession in 2008, which caused a huge constriction in finances in all of these supporting organizations. Organization nearly folded, renamed themselves, new lease on life, and then the sine wave of fluctuation began to follow pretty much the sine wave of the influx of Lilly funding, Lilly endowment funding into theological schools and faith-based organizations. So one of the things that we've done in ALLLM is discern what it means to map the landscape that we're doing this work in, so that we are no longer reactive but proactive and supportive. We have been doing work to try to shore up our identity as an organization independent of these fluctuations, so that we can continue to resource people, because sometimes in the times of most constriction, those are the moments when people who provide this kind of support for clergy and non-ordained ministers need the most support. We've found ourselves having to navigate all the changing definitions of church and ministry as the context in which these 2 activities find themselves have exploded. We found lifelong learning to be identified as one of the 5 pillars of support in Thad Austin's work through the Common Table to identify supporting organizations that help to sustain clergy. And as I mentioned, for about 6-7 years, we've been a related learning organization of the REA. ALLLM finds itself at this time at a really interesting location. As we have discerned our location and function as an organization, we see that both as an organization and the professionals who comprise our membership, we're squarely located at the intersection of the 3 primary contexts that both influence and are influenced by the work of ministry. And that would be, of course, church, the academy, and the communities in which these churches, academies, and the people who constitute their populations find themselves. So broadly speaking, we are, in lifelong learning, a distinct area of work, but we are also a confluence of other areas of work, which is not unlike the very process-oriented, intersectional, and distinct character of religious education and its practitioners. As you're going to see, we've experienced tremendous growth in this field of lifelong learning, a growth that's accompanied in many ways by the kind of fragmentation and dissolution of previous categories and understandings. So this makes the work of understanding what lifelong learning is and how it is being practiced in our member organizations all the more important. Part of our work has been informed by a presentation that John Wimmer gave back in 2010 to a group of Sustaining Pastoral Excellence grant recipients from the Lilly Endowment. And he talked about lifelong learning and the stuff that happens to support ministry outside of degree programs as an edge organization. And he he describes this EDGE organization as being kind of in but not of the system. It begins organically as innovation. Um, he's giving this talk, remember, in 2010, as traditional ways of configuring congregational life and the theological schools that prepare people for its leadership were already well in decline. As ATS data has shown us, degree programs have pretty much been in persistent decline since about 2004. Wimmer was looking for signs of life in the ecosystem. Partly fueled by his good organizational thinking, and partly fueled as well, since he was a person of deep faith, by his resurrection theology. Um, One of the things that Wimmer pointed out in this talk is the usefulness of using ecological rather than linear or organizational metaphors and models for understanding the work. And so our team at ALLLM has landed on the notion of the ecotone as a preferred way to describe what we do and where we are located. So instead of just describing lifelong learning programs as EDGE organizations, we prefer using Ecotone in part because it doesn't just name our relation to the center, which many identify as being in decline right now, but it describes rather the particularity, the distinctiveness, the reality of lifelong learning in itself. Ecotones are transitional ecosystems that find themselves in between two other distinct biomes. They're marked by rich diversity and abundance. And interestingly, wildlife from the adjacent biomes, here let's say from the land and the aquatic ecosystems, go into the wetlands, the marshlands, to both feed and breed. Indeed, we're compelled enough by this image that it provides the title for a book project members of ALLLM are contributing to. We have it under contract with ATLA Open Press. It's called Sustaining Ministry Education, Cultivating the Ecotone of Lifelong Learning. Lisa Kimball is on the screen. She's one of our contributors. And it's a collection of essays published that will be edited by my colleague Daryl Stevens that focus on discovery, innovation, nurture, and sustainability in lifelong learning. Now, one of the real values of being an EDGE organization like this is the way it provides a creative and expansive space that allows for these very things, discovery, innovation, nurture, and sustainability, to flourish. Indeed, anecdotally, I've often heard from peers that they appreciate the educational and programmatic freedom that this work provides. And as John Wimmer has pointed out, these are the spaces where new life happens. So the research that we've been doing has been diving into these programs and their leaders, starting with programs in theological schools, so we can have a snapshot of what this work looks like, where its possibilities are, where its pain points are. And today, you are getting the first public peek into the results of this survey, which we have just completed. I'm going to be following up the survey that we did with some interviews, so please note that these are simply some hot takes and high-level observations. Think of yourselves as people walking alongside me as we look at some of these data. I will be counting on you to help me attune myself to things that I might want to be looking at more closely as we do our deep analysis in the coming months. So let me give you a little 411 on the survey itself. We ran our first survey through ALLLM in 2020-2021. Our initial intent was to map the landscape of lifelong learning programs for ministry for the first time in 40 years. We developed and intended to conduct a comprehensive survey of program leaders, beginning with those located in ATS member schools, because we had an identifiable group of respondents, as opposed to trying to fish with a net in a deep ocean, which is part of the shadow side of some of the fragmentation and proliferation of these programs out in the wild. As you know, something happened in 2020 that really impacted the research that we were doing. We thought we were just going to be taking the temperature of lifelong learning programs. Instead, what we ended up with is a really valuable snapshot of these programs within theological schools as they were pivoting in real time to the global pandemic. We had 67 respondents to our survey out of what we identified at the time as 86 programs and about 273 ATS member schools. What we collected information on was the programs, where they're located, how they're structured, what their content and processes are, the directors of these programs, who are they, and then the institutional support that's provided to these programs. What we decided to do is reboot the survey for 24-25, hoping to do a longitudinal query into the program for comparative data and expand our constituency as well. I'm going to be adding, as I mentioned, some interview data over the summer to test some of our initial observations elicited by the survey. The survey asking about all of these areas, what we're finding is that it's providing a good longitudinal view of an industry rather than individuals within these programs. So we can't track shifts in attitudes of the program directors. We can only track the industry. Why? As you can see, we've got a different population of people we're polling. 54 respondents in about 135 programs. It's huge growth in just 5 years. We'll be looking at part of the reason for this growth. A big part of it is the impact of the Pathways to Ministry grants that were provided by the Lilly Endowment for schools and other organizations to imagine alternative pathways to becoming a minister. And about half of the, Chris, you're going to have to correct me on this, 105, 108 schools that received the phase 2 grants of about $1 to $1.5 million had some kind of lifelong learning non-degree program as part of their grant portfolio. So anyways, we are now taking the temperature after a time of extreme change in the industry of lifelong learning with all of these new programs that had grown up because of the Lilly funding. Some of our hot takes as we initially look at our most recent survey data. Like I mentioned, we've got a longitudinal view of the industry rather than of the individuals leading the programs. We're really marveling at the highly educated, highly committed character of the directors who really get the distinctiveness of lifelong learning work. That seems to be coming through both in the numbers and in some of the more qualitative responses that our survey respondents have provided. The third observation we have, I describe it as it was ever thus. There's a whole lot of anxiety overall in the industry of theological education. And attending this anxiety is a lot of creativity and pragmatic responsiveness in the lifelong learning programs themselves. One observation I had during the first survey is that there was a lot of, pandemic, we got to be nimble, we're going to pivot, what are we going to do here? And all but 4 of the programs in that first survey reported that the pandemic had actually been an unexpected boon and benefit to their work. They were able to pivot swiftly, they were able to respond, they all experienced growth. This time around, as we'll see, there's a sense of more missional focus, more groundedness in their observations about the programs and perceptions about what the programs need. Not sure why. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that many of these programs came out of a strategic missional initiative, maybe related to like a Pathways grant. That's one possibility. I'm not sure. It's not necessarily because the people who lead these programs are older and wiser. I'll be showing you a slide in a moment that shows you the length of tenure for many of these leaders. This is a very new group of people on the whole who are leading these programs. What we do observe too is that there's often a lack of material support in schools. There's a lot of, hey, you're great, atta girl, atta boy, go do a good thing from the institutions, but these directors are operating on shoestrings, often very understaffed, and the perception that they are under-resourced in the work that they do, which leads to an observation that there's a kind of disconnect between core institutional priorities, even strategic priorities, and the importance of lifelong learning for the missional vitality of the school. So this is a real photo, friends. That is an F1 tornado, and that is the steeple of a theological school on the right-hand side. This actually happened last year. The overall perception, if you ask people about what's going on in the industry, is that it's not going well, and there's this kind of apocalyptic feel that people have. But I'm here to tell you that that's not the whole picture. There's a lot of really great stuff happening on behalf of theological education. It's just not always in the places where people look. The coda to the story is that that tornado missed the steeple. Just in case you're worried about that, the rooster still stands. So here's some lovely ATS data from Colloquy Online from this past November. It was reported as good news. Indeed it is. It's the first time that there's a general uptick in enrollment and degree programs that they're able to report. One of the things that I find fascinating is in 2024, when this was published, the percent increase in non-degree seeking students in theological schools was 24.2%. Of course, what this might mean is non-degree certificates, people who are auditing classes and so on. In general, what it means is that the big growth industry in theological education right now is in the non-degree sector, which is largely led by the people who are the people we surveyed, the people in lifelong learning and continuing education type programs. So this is definitely a bright spot. And it's also, I think, indicative of the impact that Lilly Endowment support of theological education has had. Like, where has that impact been? This is a clear place where that's happening. Let's turn now to the directors of the programs themselves. Remember, if you've got any questions or you want to make comments, please use that raise hand function if you can. It's going to put you at the top of my gallery view, and I'll be able to recognize you and ask you to unmute. So let's take a look at who's leading this work. One of the things we inquired about was the educational background. These are highly educated people. 36 out of the 54 people we surveyed have either a research doctorate, a PhD, THD, or a practices doctorate like a DMin, a DEdmin, or a related degree. I find that to be fascinating. It also means that they're bringing a lot of serious educational and research chops to the work that they're doing. Interestingly, a few of the respondents who are in quote, who received quote, other master's or MDiv degrees are themselves now in doctoral programs, sometimes in their own institution, recognizing, of course, their own need to be lifelong learners. So this is a very new cohort of professionals as well. When I did the survey and compared this to the length of tenure, 20 of these directors, 20 out of the 54, had been doing this work for fewer than 2 years. 34 of them, so the majority, have been doing it for fewer than 5 years. And for those of you who have acclimated and enculturated into a new job, you know that it really takes about 4 years to feel like you can take the training wheels off and know what you're doing. So this is a very green group of people in many ways, and none of them, because we asked, trained to do this particular kind of work. So this, for me, as an educator, does, and as a member of this guild, raises interesting questions about the distinctiveness of this work and what one needs to do this particular work well in terms of content, practices, and vocational identity. Now let's take a look at the staffing and the program size. This is an interesting slide here. We've got one outlier respondent, so for the sake of not skewing the median, I did pull them out. One of our outliers has 14 staff, which is extraordinary, and as you can see on the right-hand side bar graph, way outside the norm elsewhere. Otherwise, the average number of staff in these programs is about 2.16, I'll call it FTE. Sometimes it's 2.16 people comprised of 4 half-time positions, sometimes it's 2 full-time people, etc. But it's 2.16 FTE. The majority of these people, 75% of the directors of these programs who responded, also have other responsibilities in their institutions. So they have hyphenated job descriptions. And if you take a look at the left-hand slide, 75% of the programs about have more than 250 participants per year. So this number is well above the median head count in degree programs in those same institutions. The median number of students, not the average, but the median number of students is 155 as of 2024-25, which means that with about 2 staff, these leaders, these directors are running programs that welcome far more people annually than degree programs do. Now, I can hear what you're saying, but Helen, it's very different being a lifelong learning participant versus a degree student. I agree. There's a lot more hand-holding and administrative and bureaucratic work required to manage a single degree-seeking student. Nevertheless, if you get high enough and you, in your periscope, and you kind of squint with one eye and take a look at the relative staffing versus the touch points and impact this work has, what we see is a deep contrast to the often robust infrastructures that seminaries and theological schools have in support of degree programs. Here at my shop, for example, we have over 100 people on full-time staff, and we've got about 25 full-time tenure track faculty in support of the degree-seeking student body. Our Center for Lifelong Learning has 6 full-time staff, I believe, with one of our people additionally being a part-time person. And this past academic year, we welcomed about 900 registrants through our program. So in terms of scale, the resourcing versus impact is very different from what you're going to find on the degree granting side of the institution. We saw these numbers reflected in responses to directors' perceptions of their work in their institutions and their administration's support of it. We used a 1 to 5 Likert scale, with 5 being most agreeing with the statement that was being made. So 5 is good, 1 is bad. It was a higher than 4.5 Likert average that people held the sense of importance and centrality of their work vis-a-vis the future of theological education. In other words, most of the people who do this work are true believers. They really see that this work is an incredibly important part of the future of theological education. But the numbers drop when you start asking them, so does your institution agree with this? What's the material support like? Are you reflected in the organizing and governing documents of the institution? Does your administration affirm you and the work that you do? The material support and for the work went down to a 4.2 from over a 4.5, and the reflection in the governance and administrative documents went down to a 3.9 on the Likert scale. So people, as I mentioned before, might be giving our directors a good attaboy, attagirl for the work that they're doing, but in terms of being able to provide the material support, we're not seeing our directors say, yeah, we also get materially supported for this work. There were some outliers. There were some people who said, yes, we have what we need, but by far the majority of people said, no, we need a lot more. And you'll see that reflected in some other data. As an organization in ALLLM, this has raised some really interesting questions for us, like, we see the importance of this work. We're clearly not messaging it effectively to administrations or governing boards in a way that helps them get the message too. So how do we close that understanding gap somehow? So about a year and a half ago, some leadership folk from ALLLM, along with some other lifelong learning leaders, gathered together here in Decatur for a wonderful symposium. And our goal at the end of the symposium was to come up with an elevator speech to describe to the unfamiliar or the non-believers what it is that we do. And instead of just coming up with a speech, we actually developed these stickers. And these stickers provided for us the best representation of the importance of lifelong learning. So on the far left, we have one of our creative people who said, "ALLLM, Almer's glue, Elmer's glue, we make vocation stick." So this idea that we through lifelong learning, help support the vocational vitality over the long haul for the people who are in our programs is reflected in that one. Lifelong Learning for Ministry also provides just-in-time learning for crises, unanticipated situations, answers to questions people didn't know that they had when they graduated from seminary. So lifelong learning because life happens. And then the last one, we wanted to recognize that lifelong learning happens across a lifetime and that a degree program is simply one pericope in the life of a lifelong learner. So you've got lifelong learning happening all the time. The degree program is one part of that, and the learning should continue. If you get in touch with me and you want copies of these stickers, I will happily stuff some in an envelope and send them to you. So you'll have my contact information at the end. We share. Next, we asked our folks what their program is going to look like in 5 years. Pull out the crystal ball, let us know. And this is a word cloud from my curation and aggregation of their open-ended text responses. Take a look here. You've got partnerships and growth. Partnerships really struck me. That really speaks to this kind of ecotone language that we're using for lifelong learning, because so many of the respondents to the survey described the need to partner with judicatories, partner with churches, partner with other constituents within their host theological schools for the vitality and future of lifelong learning as a central part of what theological education needs to look like. They all anticipated some kind of growth, except as you can see the word smaller down below. A couple of folks said smaller. What I'm looking forward to is digging in and seeing if it's smaller, shrinking because of constricting resources, because of scaling appropriately to manage sustainability and deeper missional focus, which is a good thing, or because they expect the industry as a whole to shrink, or perhaps some other thing that I have not yet anticipated. This is the Wordle that I created, the word cloud last year, or excuse me, a couple of years ago when I did the first view of the 2020 survey. Take a look at these words. There's so much more dynamism here. The other words reflect a kind of less reactive, more strategic, measured approach to a program which they hope will be sustainable. Here, one of the biggest words is unpredictable. Now, of course, that could be part of the fact that we're in the front stages of a global pandemic, unlike any of us have ever seen before. They're talking about growth, hybrid, expansion, vibrancy. These are much more electric words. So what I'm seeing from this is perhaps more missional focus and maturity happening in our industry. Chris, I'll send you stickers. Next, we inquired how these leaders, the respondents to our survey, are supported professionally. And we discovered that at least part of the structure of what they are offered as benefits was quite good. 9 out of 10 of them, as you see here, have access to professional development funds, which is fantastic. We want our lifelong learning leaders to be lifelong learners themselves. But only a quarter of the respondents had access to any kind of sabbatical or research leave time. And many of these people reported, yeah, I've got these benefits, but I haven't been able to use them because I'm so busy. With a staffing of 2.16 for a participant group that's over 250, you can see how that could be the case. And additionally, as I mentioned, 3/4 of them, 75%, have additional institutional responsibilities. Only 2 of the respondents named active support from their institution for lifelong learning. Mostly people said things like, it's hard for us to innovate as our institution runs on a shoestring. Sort of, how do you do creative programming in an institution that operates on a theology of scarcity? I need more support from the school. I need better buy-in from the institution. This was a frequent refrain in this survey. It was a frequent refrain in 2020 as well. So what do they need to be able to thrive in their position? Once again, I took all of their free form responses, coded them, and aggregated them into like categories. You'll see here I've got time and space and professional development and networking as 2 separate things. That's because time and space is more like the sabbatical, the ability to reflect, not being busy 14 hours a day. And the professional development and networking has to do with peer organizations, professional guilds, buddies who do this work, not feeling isolated. So they're different in their tone. As you can see, people need more people, and they need more money. One of the things that they reflected in their comments was that lifelong learning was perceived to be a fringe effort ancillary to the main mission of the institution. Rather than flipping the script within the institution and seeing lifelong learning as learning across a whole vocation, of which the degree program is simply one part of it. So in many ways, if you're going to accept a student into a degree program and say we're going to commit to forming you or advancing your formation for ministry you either want to do or are already doing, the lifelong learning continues that covenant over a vocation that's likely to have interruptions, crises, costume changes. A lot of institutions don't apparently reflect that flipping the script version of what lifelong learning is in an institution back to their directors. This reflected to me a similar reality I observed as a member of REA and as a religious educator, that religious ed is both a discrete discipline and at the same time it is a process that undergirds the way in which all other disciplines are engaged. So it's both discrete and meta at the same time, which I find really interesting. And it's interesting how those who lead these programs that are intended to support the ongoing critical reflection on ministry practice or faithful lay leadership are themselves unable to engage in that same dynamic themselves because they're understaffed, they're under-resourced, they don't have enough time. As they used to say, the cobbler's children have no shoes. Rounding to home plate, what else would you like to say? We asked them. These are the kinds of things they said. One of our respondents, I love this. This is wild terrain. Okay, she's gone for an environmental metaphor. Love it. She feels very grateful she can create almost anything. She says it's one of the futures of theological education. I do think that the future of ministry in the biggest and broadest sense and spiritual care will require work outside of denominational confines and the capacities, this is key, for institutions to recognize the durable skills of ministry. And I would say their ongoing care and feeding. This respondent, she says, and I'm just using she generically throughout here, I'm pretty passionate about the value of lifelong learning. It can serve as an important mechanism for the visibility and direct experience of the goods a theological school can produce. This seems particularly important with, and this is key, the professional model of theological education shifting towards a human formation focus. Lifelong learning is built for a formation model. And finally, she says, another respondent, a third one, says, as a seminary, lifelong learning is an important part of what we're called to do. The university of which we are a part only values academic credit hours and degree-seeking students, seeing lifelong learning as a low priority. So this is where my data end, and I would love to get some feedback from you folks here in the room. I would love to hear from you. Go ahead, unmute. We're a small group. What struck you most in the previous data? And re reflecting on that, what are one or two questions about lifelong learning and ministry that were sparked for you today that will stay with you after you sign off? Your conversation here is important to me as I continue to dig into this data over the course of the rest of the summer. And I know those of you on the screen have some thoughts about it. So please, what are you thinking? What strikes you? Just if you don't want to use the raise hand function, just go ahead, unmute and talk.
Hey, Helen. Hey, everyone. Thanks for this great presentation. I always look forward to hearing updates on your work and the work of the group.
Mhm.
I just had a really quick observation, not so much a question, but just that there's a kind of what's the right phrase? A wag the dog that happens when everything is institutionalized. And
Yeah.
so the other day there was in one of the REA presentations, there was a side conversation of what might be the core value or principle of North American or U.S. religious education, and somehow we meandered to a tentative answer of capitalism. So anyway,
Ouch.
uh, and I see that in that last comment, or maybe it's one of the last comments about how there's just a lessened value when it comes to, I think it was credit hours or in that context. So it's just striking. And I'm trying to not wear my ATS hat when I say that, right? So just, disaffiliate my comments from the ATS for a moment. But that's just striking to see that the system almost determines what the value might be when it comes to all this. So again,
Yeah.
thanks for your presentation.
I'd love for you to say a little bit more about your tail wagging the dog comment here, because it's and it it connects to some thinking that I've been doing about the tension between being an edge organization or being an ecotone where so much vitality is happening and the risks of becoming more institutionalized. So if you could say a few words about what you mean by the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, I'll try to extend the metaphor without mangling it, but
Israel
I
Galindo, who's
don't.
on this call, loves metaphors, so make sure
Oh,
you use
good,
lots of
good.
them for him.
Well, if I continue with the dog metaphor, I also want to be careful not to get or to bite the hand that feeds is another maybe way to put it. But the fact that there has been this influx of cash into ATS schools is an indicator, perhaps, of how there is a certain set of values that need to look a certain way. And it's great that there are um, proliferating pathways toward ministry and approaches towards the future of these schools. But then if we take a step back, one wonders, didn't formation happen for so long without all of the trappings and complexities that we have, for good reason, by the way, that we have them. But this isn't the only times and places that lifelong learning happens, just like formation doesn't only happen as part of a curriculum. In fact, there's an argument to make, right, that it's co-curricular, maybe not even at a school that formation happens. So what are we tracking actually, and the assumptions that are made, um, the fact that these are so very structured and regimented in ways that the organizations can understand. So again, I don't have my ATS hat on when I say all these things, right? So
It'll be interesting to see how some of these results change when we identify and begin to poll other places where lifelong learning happens. Now remember, this survey is only in ATS member schools. Why? Low-hanging fruit. There's an umbrella there. We know who they are. I can get the names off of your website, and we can figure out who the lifelong learning leaders there are. It becomes a whole lot squishier when well, it's almost as sure when we're talking about denominations and judicatories, but that assumes that you're not talking about a congregational polity system. where there's actually a central office like the Lutherans have or the Episcopalians have. Then it gets squishier when you go to congregational polity. Then it gets squishier even more when you start going to like where are all the mega churches that grow all of their lifelong learning in-house. And then how about all of these mom and pop shops and retreat centers? Like, how do you even begin to identify where those places are? So it would be interesting if we could get a real landscape instead of a medieval map that shows like the known territory and then it says here be dragons um, to figure out what's going on and see how the attitudes change as these programs are further and further away from what is often identified as the institutional center of theological education. That's my research nerd brain kind of going haywire here. But I think one of the things that I want to take from your comments is, at least as a person who's in leadership in ALLLM, I want to figure out how to support our members in continuing to be a vibrant, creative edge organization with all of those good, juicy capacities, and also at the same time to understand the wisdom of appropriate institutional structure, because we got to have legs if we're going to walk someplace, you know, to use another metaphor. We've got to have some kind of structure in order to be able to get our work done. But we want the structure to be serving the mission rather than the other way around. And I think what begins to happen sometimes is sustaining the institution becomes the mission.
Yeah, someone's got to carve the kayak.
I have a blow-up kayak. So I bring it with me wherever I go, but that's a great metaphor. Thanks so much, Chris. Anybody else have thoughts? Alan, I see you've put a good, juicy comment in. You want to unmute and share with the group?
Yeah, I had to think it through before I said it out loud, so as not to take too much time. But compensation closely tied to tuition. So if you're doing something that there's not a one-to-one correspondence between students' pay, you receive some sort of compensation. If the denomination can't help or isn't helping, then you may end up asking faculty or other staff to commit to something where they end up farther out on the limb of, wow, you're doing really great work and it's really hard for us to let you go. And what you do does not bring in money. And right now, that's what we need. So unfortunately, we have to stay with those folks who are revenue generators.
Is your assumption here that the lifelong learning program is the revenue generator or the degree program?
The degree program. And it's not so much an assumption as, well, I am drawing in administrative assumptions rather than stating my own.
So John says, of course, a lifelong learning program requires a good business plan. Amen, John, you're absolutely right. The interesting thing is that these programs, another set of questions we asked that I didn't go over is, what is your annual revenue for your program, and are you expected to generate enough revenue to support your program and pay for your salaries and benefits as a director? And what the data show is that in the majority of responses, the Lifelong Learning Center and the director are expected to generate enough income to be self-sustaining and self-supporting, which means that they are often not a net draw on the institution. They are often a net contributor to the institution. We certainly are here at Columbia. We're a net contributor to the institution. But it brings to mind a really interesting study that the Lewis Center is anchoring right now. Chris, I don't know if you're aware of whether or not they've completed the study. It's looking at the real economics to support one degree-seeking student through a degree program versus the cost of supporting lifelong learning participants. And because of how heavily subsidized degree-seeking students often are, the real costs of bringing a degree-seeking student through to completion is often hidden. So for example, faculty are not expected to generate revenues from credit hours to support their own salary, but that economic model is expected of lifelong learning directors. So Chris, do you know anything more about where that research is?
No, actually, I'll read my chat. I'm not. I think that Lovett was thinking through the dissemination
Okay.
of their work, but I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. It's something I'm going to be really interested to see because I think what it will do is show that lifelong learning programs are actually highly efficient ways of delivering theological education, and they are not the net draws on institutional resources that most people assume they are. The assumption that they are is typically built on using a different economic set of values to judge the economic viability of a lifelong learning program versus the economic viability of a degree program. John, do you want to just unmute and share? These are great comments. It'd be good to see your face and hear your voice.
It's nice to see you too. Uh, it, my institution just wrote a grant for a Lilly project that would do a lifelong learning program where we don't have one. And the grant said, look, you have to pay for yourself, number one, or at least you have to, or even boost the amount of money that the institution is getting. So we ended up doing something that paid for itself. But as I wrote in the chat, like if we're reaching 200-300 people a year and we're graduating maybe 30 or 40 people at the most who are getting degrees, our profile is and our reach is going out much farther than just with the graduates that we have.
We love using the phrase friend raising in our work, the touch points that we have and the impression that we're making is huge. And frankly, the potential student body, if you want to use that language, the potential audience or constituency for lifelong learning programs is endless. You're not just looking at people who have the time, resources, and ability to put 3 years of their life on hold to seek a degree. You're reaching laity who are theologically curious or desiring to level up their leadership skills in their communities. This is blue ocean stuff here. So the institution potentially has reached to a massive audience, a massive sea of supporters and participants and members of the community through a lifelong learning program that expands far beyond what they could get in a degree program. Lisa, oh wise Lisa, who has been doing this for these many years, could you please unmute and share your comment?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Helen. I mean, in some ways, I just love having the data because it affirms what my core being has known for a long time, right? And it's like we can finally demonstrate some of this. The comment sort of stands for itself. We're in a position where we're fortunate the institution does pay salaries. We are not required to fully, we don't have to generate enough revenue to run the entire department, we call it, but we do have to generate revenue, and that amount goes up every year. And there's some strain on that, just the sense of, do we want to emphasize access or do we want to emphasize profit, right? I mean, there's kind of this constant tension. I was going to go somewhere else if I was going to make a comment, which is, I'm glad to know you're going to expand beyond ATS schools, because I think there's so many things we've been talking about in this conference that have been so rich in the sense of to sort of shrink it to like the flattening of access to education, right? The digital benefits or not, cost and quality aside, in our denomination, the Episcopal Church, there are so many local and regional schools of formation now that are themselves trying to make it, right? And we want to be supportive of them. So there's a whole nother dimension of what might lifelong learning initiatives in ATS accredited schools look like if we begin to yet pivot more, whatever that is, and see ourselves as resources to more local, contextual, culturally particular environments of learning that are much more adjacent to the contexts and the ecotones people are living in, right? I mean, what we've long known here is we can put a great class up online. We can offer something that's of good quality and we'll get a decent registration base. but there's that percentage that come to everything you do, you know, that sort of the returning people who just love you and your school. And then there are the few curious, but our impact in terms of sustained learning,
Mhm.
we can't walk with all those individuals. So we're trying to figure out, what does it mean to be a resource that is blessed with the robust resources of a faculty and all of that, for the sake of these other forms of local formation.
Yeah.
And I think that feels like an ethical issue for us, that we are in a seminary that right now is stable financially. That's a huge privilege. So what is ours to share and give away, and what is ours to how do we continue to learn how to help others learn?
Yeah.
And that's where I'm focusing, is bringing our faculty into the relationship, because like many of the research, much of the research shows, it's hard to get faculty to commit to things in lifelong learning.
Yeah.
You know, oh, you have to book them 2 years out. I'm writing a book. I'm on sabbatical. I've got, you know, oh, I work so hard. I've got, but the reality is, they're the people, or even our alumni, want to hear from, right?
Yeah.
And so we're trying to cultivate curiosity on the part of our faculty to work with us on being mentors, teachers, trainers, whatever the right language is going to be,
Yeah.
people who they have been dismissive about, those less than, in our case, residential seminary faculty teaching theology in Minot, North Dakota, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm excited. So I'm just sort of fuming. I mean, I'm just sort of
Yeah.
not fuming. I'm just riffing, but I am hopeful about the future of learning,
Mhm.
but I'm not sure that, I think the tension between institutionalized boundaries, the way Chris was raising them,
Yeah.
and free, porous boundaries is really real.
So much we could go into. I'm realizing that we're also at time. These are great comments, and I love in shorthand, what you just talked about was the responsibility for robust programs to commit to equipping the equippers, and recognize that this gift that we have that needs to be shared in ways that allow for this kind of formation to happen in the local places where the points of access are most immediate. Mary, I would love to dig into your question about AI. My shorthand is we offer spaces of connection, of curiosity. We can do some curation. At this point, the large language models aren't able to do, but let's be in touch and loop Tay Moss into this conversation about lifelong learning, formation, and AI for a future date. In fact, stay tuned. I might ask you to help us do a webinar on that. Dan Aylshire, who himself has become a prophet of the formational approach rather than the professional approach of theological education, wrote this in a summary essay in Trust. As I said, lifelong learning is built for formation. Lastly, please stay in touch. Here's my email address, QR code if you want to connect to ALLLM. And yeah, I would love to continue the conversation. This is really good, important stuff. I would be remiss, Alex would chase me down if I did not remind you to fill out the feedback form that he is going to be putting in the chat if he has not done so already. So grateful to have you guys as colleagues in this work. Thank you so much, and let's continue the conversation.